Terrarian in the Dungeon, Chapter 77, Fan Fiction, by Azazyel. Please like and subscribe to this YouTube channel for listening and patreon.com/Azazyel to read all of his stories. Gods, how I hated midgets. The 5 Gulliver brothers were all Pallums at level 5, with them all even being quintuplets. And they were ornery little shits because they hated Finn Deime for taking the spotlight as the leading Pallum of Orario. Hell, other than Otter, who was just a silent dude who only spoke when he had to, no one cared for or really even liked any of Freya's high-level adventurers, as they were all completely assholes, as they seemed to abandon all their social grace to devote themselves entirely to being a simp for Freya. That's why everyone loved the Loki Familia so much. They were all a cast of characters, and except for Bet Loga, you could easily just sit down with any of the Loki Familia executives and just enjoy lunch with them, as they were rather relaxed people and friendly if you weren't harming their interests. But this midget was irritating me, to say the least, with his attitude. For someone with such a big head, you would think that your head would bobble around when you walk up the stairs. The Gulliver brother, wearing a mask, snarked. With how fucking short you are, I am surprised you don't need a kick-stool to climb the stairs for adults. I deadpanned, and I could all but feel his flash of wrath aimed at me for basically calling him a racial slur by remarking about his height. But as we reached the top of the stairs, I wanted to groan at who was sitting in an ornate chair in front of a highly decorated wooden door. A woman with light red hair down up in twin tails and wearing a more low-cut and well-decorated nurse outfit. Hythe Velvet. I hope you have been well. I greeted her with a smile as I put on a more natural smile, as Hythe's face twisted at the sight of me before smoothing over as she looked to the Gulliver brother. Alfrig. Did Lady Freya summon him? She asked bluntly, ignoring me, and I heard the man snort in response, but I was more focused on how Heath's eyes looked dull and fucked up. Her voice was beyond dull and more like she was a machine. No. But you know Lady Freya told us to bring him and the white-haired one in if they visited. Alfrig said before swiping his hand aside. Now move aside, doll. He ordered, and Heath blinked before nodding as she moved aside, and honestly, that dull stare was starting to freak me out. Was that soul stuff Seshet told me about her even worse than she guessed? I thought that Seshet's words about the red-haired healer's soul being a twisted up knot due to Freya's charm were underestimated, and instead her soul was falling apart or something. Either way, Heath moved out of the way from standing guard in front of the door, and Alfred, the eldest of the Gulliver brothers, knocked on the door, and then a moment later a bell beside the door gently jingled 5 times in a row, as Freya obviously pulled a string or something so she wouldn't have to shout to come in. Don't do anything stupid, as Otter is just down the hall, and before you can even climb out of a window, you will be dead. Alfred warned me fiercely as he glared at me before he glanced at the bell that was inlaid above the door and blended in with the dark wood of the dew, are making me realize that the 5 rings of the bell were meant to be a code from her, to only allow me into the room. For a moment, I feared that Freya would attempt to fry my brain with her charm, before I shook that thought away, as that wasn't in her style at all for her targets of interest. The door silently swung open at Heath pushing the door, and I walked into the highly posh room and saw a beautiful, decent-sized bed and a large couch positioned in front of the large open glass doors that led out onto a balcony. But my gaze was drawn to the form lounging on the couch, and I saw that she was wearing a scandalous outfit that was her almost torn-looking body glove outfit that was black and red, with the edges of the outfit being red. Lady Freya. I greeted her while focusing more on her face, as I realized her exposed skin was a bit too distracting. Sure, Freya was troublemaking, but no one would ever deny her status as one of the purely most beautiful women in the world, and I was still a red-blooded male, so my gaze wandered a bit. Jake Barris, record breaker, summoner of calamities, captain of the rising Seshet Familia. You have already earned an interesting number of names in so little time, that even with my own interest in your path, I cannot seem to catch up with them. Hee. Freya daintily giggled as she crossed a leg over the other as I strode to one of the seats arrayed next to the couch and sat down in it. Oh, you could have just sat beside me. Freya pouted, and I smiled wryly at Freya's pout that made me pity her a bit, but thankfully, with my Terrarian logic, I didn't have to worry about her charm. Lady Freya, have your adventurers had any time to go down to the dragon vase to get the ores I asked for? I asked, trying to get straight to business, and at that, Freya clicked her tongue in annoyance, not necessarily at me but at her own situation apparently, that she began to explain as she swirled her wine glass. Freya eventually sighed before she threw me an apologetic smile, and my heart sank as I realized I was going to have to make a trip to get those hell-themed resources on my own. Or more specifically, I was going to have to travel outside of Orario to that nearby volcano so I could get the materials I needed from within it. I had no way to survive getting to the dragon base on the 59th floor of the dungeon, as the monsters were too numerous and strong for me to push that deep, even if I cheated and tunneled. I would still get killed by the army of dragons that filled the dragon base even if I tunneled outside the dungeon and down to its floor. Jake, I apologize, but with Loki's familia down doing their own expedition that had already been pushed back, and with Evolus raising their head up again to cause trouble, my familia cannot delve down to the depths of the dungeon to retrieve those ores, as they are all needed to protect Orario, Freya explained gently, and I nodded in understanding. Sure, it was inconvenient, but super terrorists were more important than my desire for some superheated materials. It just meant I needed to get my own at the volcano that even Azazyel Andromeda, the captain of the Hermes familia, went to get the materials needed to make her bombs that almost her entire fighting style revolved around. Then I apologize for my intrusion. I will dash. Before I could stand up, Freya coughed, raising an eyebrow as she looked at me with an unreadable emotion as she stared into my eyes, and I likewise met her lavender eyes. Jake, why don't you share lunch with me? She offered, smiling softly with true welcoming care in her voice as she continued. I would like to have some words with you. I would adore hearing about your adventures and how you came to be so strong and with such a vibrant soul to match. She finished huskily, and I smiled wryly as her lavender eyes almost pinned me to the couch while I considered if I could teleport home and get Belle and the rest of the girls out of Orario before Freya can lose her shit at me ghosting her. But then I just mentally shrugged as to what could go wrong with just having lunch.